The command landed before the greeting. Turn that off. It cut across the table where foil was being folded, across the heat lifting from the grill, across the sound of children moving behind the benches. The words were short, flat, and practiced. A hand pointed, not at a person, but at the grill's metal leg. A paper was already visible on the board. White sheet, black text, corners taped. No one looked at it. That's not allowed here. The response came immediately, in the correct order, with the correct object. A finger lifted toward the board. The paper did not move. We have a permit. The sentence did not slow anything down. I don't care what you printed. Charcoal grills aren't allowed. The foot shifted closer. The toe of a sneaker touched the grill's base, not hard enough to knock it over, just enough to register contact. You can't bring things like this from home. A hand moved to steady the grill. The movement was small. The lid stayed closed. Smoke continued to rise in a straight line. It's permitted. The paper was still there. The time on the watch read 1:15. I've lived here 30 years, the woman said. I know how this park works. She did not look at the board. She reached into her bag instead. Don't argue, she added. I'm calling this in. The phone came out already unlocked. You people are breaking the rules. The word landed without emphasis, like a label on a folder. The screen lit up. The call connected. The voice on the other end asked a question that could not be heard. The woman turned her back slightly, cupping the phone with her hand. Yes, she said. There's a large group. They're using an illegal grill. They won't leave. A pause. Yes, it's loud. It's disruptive. The paper came off the board now. It was held at chest height, angled forward so the camera could see it. Another phone was already up, its lens steady, framing the paper and the woman's shoulder in the same shot. This is a valid permit, Lauren Harris said, voice even. Issued by the city, Area 3, charcoal allowed. The woman did not turn around. They're getting aggressive, she said into the phone. I feel unsafe. No one had stepped closer to her. The grill lid lifted. A pair of tongs clicked once, then stopped. The lid came back down. Michael Harris pressed the record button. The sound was audible. Please note, he said, that we are permitted to be here. The woman ended the call and finally looked back. She smiled once, briefly, without teeth. Let the police explain it to you, she said. It'll be easier that way. She stepped aside but did not leave. She stayed close enough to hear everything. Children had stopped running. The music was still on, but someone lowered it until it was just sound without words. Daniel Harris moved to stand beside the table. He did not raise his voice. We're asking that this be documented. The woman tilted her head. Of course you are. 2 cars arrived 12 minutes later. Tires on gravel, doors closing. The uniforms approached without urgency. What seems to be the problem? Officer James Cole asked. The woman answered before anyone else could. They're having an illegal barbecue, charcoal grill, no permit. Officer Emily Parker's eyes went to the board automatically. The tape marks were still there, empty now. Do you have a permit? Cole asked. Lauren handed it over, paper to hand. No commentary. Cole read. Parker checked the pavilion number. A phone call was made. Names were repeated. Dates confirmed. The grill continued to smoke. It's valid, Cole said. Charcoal is allowed here. The woman laughed once. A short sound. You always trust paper over people who actually live here. Parker ended the call she was on. Ma'am, she said, the permit checks out. The woman crossed her arms. That doesn't mean they should be here. Cole looked up. That's not your decision. The silence after that was measurable. The sun did not move. The clock did. We're asking you to leave them alone, Parker said. If you continue, this becomes harassment. I have a right to this park, the woman said. And they have a right to their permit, Cole replied. Daniel Harris stepped forward half a pace. We'd like this incident recorded as a false report. Cole nodded and took out his notebook. The woman's face changed then, not anger, not surprise. Something flatter. This neighborhood isn't what it used to be, she said. Parker cut in immediately. That's enough. The woman turned away, walking fast, still talking, her words trailing behind her and breaking apart before they reached anyone. The officers finished writing. Names were confirmed, badge numbers given. I'm sorry this happened, Cole said. For the record. The cars left. The grill stayed on. The paper was taped back onto the board, its corners smoothed down carefully. No one spoke for a moment. Then Michael Harris said, quietly, Keep recording. And everyone did. The paper stayed in the officer's hand longer than necessary. He read it once, then again. He checked the pavilion number printed at the top, then looked past the paper to the metal sign bolted to the post. His partner stepped closer, not to the group, but to the board, where the tape marks were still visible. Area 3, Officer James Cole said. Officer Emily Parker nodded and took out her phone. She moved a few feet away, turning her body slightly, so her voice carried back without aiming at anyone. A name, a date, a permit number. She waited. The grill continued to work. Smoke rose at the same pace as before. No one touched it. The woman stood with her arms crossed, weight shifted onto one hip. She watched the officers, not the family. When Parker repeated the number into the phone, the woman released a short breath through her nose. Cole lowered the paper. It's valid, he said. He held the permit out. Lauren Harris took it and did not comment. The woman let out a brief laugh. It ended as soon as it started. You always trust paper more than people who live here. Cole did not respond. He stepped back half a pace. Parker ended the call and put her phone away. Charcoal is allowed in this area, she said. They're within their reserved time. The woman uncrossed her arms and crossed them again, tighter than before. That doesn't mean they should be here. Cole looked directly at her. That's not how permits work. The distance between them closed slightly. No one touched anyone. Ma'am, Parker said, you reported illegal activity. We're not seeing a violation. The woman looked past them, toward the tables, the coolers, the grill. Her eyes did not stop on the permit now folded in Lauren Harris's hand. They're still loud. The music was already low. It did not change. Parker scanned the area. The tables were spaced out. Children were seated. No one was moving toward the woman. This is a permitted gathering, she said. You don't have the authority to remove them. Michael Harris kept the phone steady. The framing did not change. Lauren Harris unfolded the permit once and refolded it along the same crease. Daniel Harris shifted his feet, then stopped. The woman shook her head once. I've watched this park for decades, she said. I know when something isn't right. Cole opened his notebook and wrote. Right now, he said, the issue is this report. He wrote again. The pen stopped. The woman's mouth opened, then closed. She adjusted the strap of her bag, pulling it higher on her shoulder. I have a right to be here, she said. You do, Parker replied. You don't have a right to interfere with a reserved use. The woman looked at the grill again. Those things start fires. Cole did not turn toward it. If you have safety concerns, he said, you can raise them with Parks, not by calling this in. Daniel Harris stepped forward half a pace. We'd like it noted as a false report, he said, for the record. Cole nodded once. That can be documented. The woman laughed again, quieter. She turned slightly away, as if to leave, then stopped. So that's it, she said. I just go? Paga mit eyes. Yes. The woman turned fully and walked back toward the path. Her pace was uneven. She spoke as she walked, words trailing behind her, without forming a complete sentence to anyone still present. Cole and Parker waited until she had put distance between herself and the pavilion. Cole closed the notebook. This will be filed, he said, holding it briefly at chest height. Permit verified, no violation. He handed over a card. If there's follow-up, he added, use that number. Lauren Harris took the card and placed it on the table, face up, beside the folded permit. Parker glanced at the phones. You're allowed to record, she said. Just don't interfere. She paused, then stepped back. The officers returned to their cars. Doors closed. Engines started. Gravel shifted under the tires as the cars pulled away. Michael Harris kept the camera running. The red dot remained on. Lauren Harris retaped the permit to the board, pressing each corner flat until it held. Daniel Harris checked the time on his watch. The grill lid lifted. Tongs clicked once. The meat was turned. The lid came down. Someone raised the music slightly, not to where it had been before. The card stayed on the table. The permit stayed on the board. The phone continued recording. The recording did not stop when the park emptied. The files were copied that evening. Each clip was saved twice. Timestamp stayed intact. Angles overlapped. Audio remained uncut. The permit was scanned. The card with the badge number was photographed. Nothing was edited. A complaint was filed the following week. Names, date, location, classification, false report, Interference with a permitted use. The attachments were listed by file name. A response came later. It confirmed receipt. It did not resolve anything. More records surfaced after that, call logs, prior reports, repeated entries ending the same way. No violation found. Permit verified. The phrasing matched across years. A civil filing followed. The claims were numbered. The exhibits were indexed. The request was specific. Damages quantified. Only materials that could be corroborated by a document, a recording, or a log were attached. The city was added after review. The basis was procedural. Prior notice. Repeated calls. No corrective action documented. The timeline appeared as an appendix. Depositions were scheduled, dates moved, requests extended, the record expanded. Settlement discussions began without a trial date. Offers changed hands. Conditions were added, then removed. Restrictions were written in plain language. Distances measured. Time limits specified. A confidentiality clause was narrowed to financial disclosures only. The agreement was executed 14 months after filing. The total amount was $2.3 million. $150,000 was assigned to the individual caller. $2,150,000 was paid by the city. Payment schedules were defined. No admission of liability was included. Operational changes were listed in non-monetary terms. Dispatch procedures were updated. Repeat callers were flagged. Permit databases were cross-checked before officers were sent. Training bulletins were issued. None of it was announced publicly. An access restriction was enforced. A distance of 500 yards from the park was specified. The duration was 5 years. Calls regarding the park were prohibited unless a crime in progress requiring immediate response was personally observed. The family did not return to that pavilion. They used a private venue the following year. A deposit replaced a permit. The date did not change. The permit from the park remained on file. It appeared again in correspondence. It was referenced in the settlement language. It existed whether anyone looked at it or not. The recordings circulated after the agreement allowed it. They were viewed without narration. The sequence remained intact. A grill, a paper, a call, a verification, a classification. A press appearance followed. The statement was read from a page. It stayed within the record. No questions were taken beyond the allotted time. "We were permitted," Lauren Harris said. "That's the point." The microphone captured it. Nothing else was added. A fund was established later. The paperwork took longer than expected. Applications were reviewed. Fees were paid. Assistance was tied to documentation. The caller filed for bankruptcy 6 months after the settlement. The docket was public. Assets were listed. The address changed. The park did not close. Families continued to use the grills. Permits were posted. Music stayed low. Officers arrived less often. When they did, permits were checked before conversations started. The original recording remained archived. The red dot is visible at the corner of the frame. The audio is steady. No one went back to correct the first command. It stayed where it landed. The record was enough. If you recognize this pattern, keep your camera on. If you are permitted, post the paper and save the file. This is Power Abuse Stories. Subscribe to see what the record does next.